Welcome back to part 3 of our cloud variable tutorial. In this part we'll be looking at the LogiX nodes and the components which allow you to read and manipulate the cloud variables. We're going to go and start with a tiny recap of the theory. Do see part 1, which is linked in the description if you have any questions on the theory here. So a variable definition, which is a definition, a name and a type and a default value and a permission set, can have more than one value. It can have a value for user 1, a value for user 2, and a value for user 3. Represented alternatively here is this favorite fruit variable, which has a value for Fruxius, Nexilin, Shifty, and ProbablePrime, which has a different value or a different fruit here. If you remember from our previous video, we created a value called testing.color, and that's the one that we're going to be using with the LogiX nodes and components. A little bit later, we'll also be using a one that's created on a group, which is created on Neos's group, because I need to test and show you the anyone permissions with that particular value. So we're going to start with the LogiX nodes. So I've equipped my LogiX tooltip here, and I'm going to open up the node browser. For the cloud variable nodes, you need to go to the variables folder, and then you need to look for the word cloud in the middle. The variables folder is still a bit cluttered with the dynamic variable nodes here. Link in the video description to my dynamic variable tutorial series. So just make sure you're using the cloud variable nodes. There are only two: read cloud variable and write cloud variable. The rest are dynamic variables or some other type of node. Let's go ahead and take a look at read cloud variable. When you click Read Cloud Variable, it will ask you to pick a data type. This depends on the data type that you specified. Testing.color, which is the first variable that we'll be using, is of type color, so we'll select color here, and then we'll spawn it in the world. With this spawned, you'll see that it has 2 inputs and an impulse input, and then 3 impulse outputs and a value output. Let's go over each one. So the top one here, the impulse input, is a read request, and what this will do is it will submit a request to read the value of that cloud variable. The second input is what's called a path. Now I need to go over paths, so I'm going to go ahead and specify that using another visual aid I have here. Paths are a little bit confusing, at least for new users to cloud variables, in that they need to be prefixed by the definition owner ID and then a period. So here we have the variable that I created last time was actually testing.color. You can see it over here, testing.color. But on this particular image, it's testing.bool. Doesn't matter, testing.color, testing.bool. The same principle applies here. The path needs to be the definition owner ID, which I have in blue here, followed by a period, followed by the path, the full path here, which is the name of the variable here. So in this case, testing.bool. Combine both of those together, you get the full path. So let's go ahead and enter that into the read cloud variable node. So here I'm going to go ahead and type U-ProbablePrime dot testing dot color. Oops, I put another period in there. Color, there we go. Now the next input is a variable owner ID, and this is the person who owns that variable value. So if we look at this, it's this person's user ID, or this person's user ID, or this person's user ID. Or on the favorite fruit list, it's U-Fruxius for Fruxius's favorite fruit, U-Nexilin for Nexilin's favorite fruit, and so on. You can see that here. The value owner ID here is U-Fruxius. When both of these are specified and we pulse that, we get the value true. So here what I'm going to do is, because this variable, by the way, is set up for read-write variable owner unsafe and no one else can read it, we need to specify me, because I'm the only one that can read my value right now. So let's go ahead and do that. So U-ProbablePrime. Do note in some cases that your user ID is not the same as your username. If you've ever changed your username, or maybe you've changed your user ID by creating a secondary account and you've forgotten that you've done that, your user ID might be different. Particularly if your username has any more complex characters in it, it may have also been changed those characters into sort of numbers or letters depending on your user ID. That's common for Japanese usernames. It's just limited to the database. The database needs to have a certain type of structure for the user ID. So do double check your user ID. I can show you how to do it. If you open up the node browser here and you go to users, and what you can do here is go for local user, and then you want user ID, connect local user to user ID, pull out a ribbon from user ID and hit secondary, and then you'll see your user ID like that. Any user can go into the input of the user ID node. So if you wanted to do user from username, get active user, whatever you want to do there can happen. And then you could take these parts and you could stick them into the bottom here. I've left it being a text box just because it's a little bit easier to show me, show you even, some failure states for this node in just a few moments. So now we can continue. Let's look at the outputs. So there are 3 outputs and then the actual value. The first output is on read request. Let's move that away for a second. This happens when the request happens. So the request takes a little bit to come back for this node. So it sends a request, which means it's happening. You can add a loading bar to this or whatever you'd like. And then it comes back with the actual value on the second impulse, which is on read. And then there's a third impulse, which is on fail. On fail usually fires if there's a permission problem. For example, you don't have permissions to write this, or the variable doesn't exist, etc. On fail will fire. When you're using this node, please add handling to on fail. So if there's a failure state, you can render it on your UI canvas or in your gadget, whatever you'd like to do. Even display a message saying like, hey, something's wrong, whatever, we'll get back to you later. Just make sure that you handle the failure states on all of these nodes. The last one is the value. Do note that the value, much like other nodes which have an impulse coming out of the side of them, are a type of use it or lose it, which is the sort of terminology I'm using for these, which is you need to read that value and do something with it in the length of one impulse, or you will lose it. In this case, what we're going to do is write it to a variable, but first of all, I wanted to show you what happens without any writing going on. What I'm going to do here is hit pulse, and what we expect to see is a read request to happen, the read to be successful, and this to have no impulse. Let's go. Pulse. So what you saw there was a read request happened, and then just a little bit after it, about a second after it, we saw that the read request succeeded. And now there would have been a value here, but we weren't doing anything with it, so it's lost. Let's go ahead and do something with that value. In this case, we'll just write it to a variable. So we'll go back to the root of our LogiX menu, we'll go to Actions, and we'll go to Write. Now we need to plug in, let's move things around a little bit. We need to plug in on read to the right. And then we need somewhere to store it. So we'll store it in a variable. So we'll go back to variables, storage, and then it's a color. So we'll say color. And we want to write this value into color. We want to write the value. And let's also pull out an onDone display node so we can still see that request chain. So let's go ahead and take a look at this now. Also to pull out display node for the color. So right now you can see there's nothing in the color. What we're going to do is pulse. So there's a request, and it came through successfully, and then the color red was written here. So this color variable now is red. So if this was a light in the world, we could then write it to red, or a piece of text, whatever we'd like, it would now be red. Because of the permissions here, set to variable owner unsafe, I can't read anyone else's values. Let's go ahead and see what Fruxius's U-ProbablePrime.testing.color is. So now we hit pulse. You'll see that we had a request and then it failed. It failed. We actually got an impulse down here once more. Failed. And that's because I don't have permission. I'm not Fruxius. I don't have permission to do it. If Fruxius was in this world and he hit pulse, it would go through successfully and it would also return red because that's the default value. So do keep that in mind with the permissions. To illustrate the difference in the permissions here, I'm going to go ahead and pull over a testing variable that was created on the group Neos, which is the group for sort of all the Neos team and Neos at large. Lots of stuff is stored in that group. It's over here, g-neos.test.color. I'm going to plug that in, and I'm going to read Fruxius's value. And because this one here, this Neos test value, was set to anyone can read-write it, it means that anyone can read-write it. So we'll be able to see the value of it. So let's go ahead and do pulse. And so this was successful. It was did a pulse here, and then it did a pulse here, and we can see that there is a yellow color here, which makes sense. Fruxius does like yellow. They're a yellow avatar usually. There's that meme where they're called the yellow dog man, but I don't like referring to them that too much. They're great. So there is the reading of U-Fruxius. As this is read anyone, we can read whoever we would like here. So for example, here I know Medra. Medra is a good friend. They're running the Creator Jam right now. Great event that runs on Sundays where you can build anything. Let's see what their g-neos.test.color is. Nothing. And so that means that they haven't specified a color for that particular value. So there you go, that's the read color variable, read cloud variable node, sorry, not read color variable, but it is a read color variable node. Let's now move on to write cloud variable. So I'm going to go ahead and make some room over here. I've got so many visual aids. If these are really helpful, do let me know. I'm happy to make more. I do want to tidy them up a little bit because they were made a little bit quickly just before I wanted to record the video today. So let's go back to the root of our node menu, and we'll go inside variables, and then we want write cloud variable here, and I'll select color and spawn that in the world. And so here's write cloud variable. It looks a lot similar to the read cloud variable, as in it's got the same number of inputs except for an additional one, and the additional one is the value that we'd like to write. So in this case, what we're going to do again is illustrate that there's a permission system at play. And the reason that we're going to do that is just that you are aware of how the onFailure handles. So we'll start by trying to write to that value that I created, so the one that I have on my account. So let's do that. So we'll first of all put out a display node for the write, which is just initiate the write request. The next one is the path, which is exactly the same as that diagram here, or the path that we've been using. So we'll do U-ProbablePrime. .testing. .color. And then again, we need a value owner ID to write this value to. So again, we'll write to me. U-ProbablePrime. Oh, I missed the E there on the end. ProbablePrime. There we go. And let's write a color. So I'm going to put out an input node here, and we'll write, let's write green. And then again, on the outputs here, we have onWriteRequest, which means the write has been submitted. We have onWritten, which means that the write has occurred. And then we have onFail, which means we didn't have permission or the value didn't exist. Let's go ahead and hit pulse. And we'll see that it wrote successfully. If we come back to my setup and we copy back across the my variable, so U-ProbablePrime-testing.color, and we copy across my user ID, and we hit pulse here, you'll see that this now went to green because I'd updated that value. Let's change this. So maybe we'll put, let's put 0.5 in here, and we'll hit pulse. And that'll update it. Do note that this doesn't update automatically. The components do, but there's some caveats on that, and I'll go over that when we get to the components later. So let's now read it again. Now I've changed it, and there we go. We've got that sort of lighter green color going on. So that is the write cloud variable node. Let's now show what happens when we have no permission to do it. So again here, I'm going to go ahead and try and write u-fruxius's value. Pulse. And fail, because again, I don't have permission. Let's now bring over that group variable that we do have permission for, which is over here, g-neos.test.color. Put this in. We'll also put it into the read setup. And then let's leave it as Fruxius for both. Actually, I don't want to overwrite Fruxius's yellow color. We'll overwrite Medra's. I'm sure they'll forgive me. I don't have a value set right now. There we go. So let's write Medra's color. Let's change it up a little bit as well. Let's pull out a display node here so we can see what we're writing. Let's change that back down to 0. Maybe we want that to be 0.2. There we go, some sort of greedy orange. I'm not that good with color. It takes me a while to get used to it due to the color blindness, so we'll go for this color. So I'm going to write g-neos.test.color to Medra's value as this color. Let's go. That failed. Why did that fail? Medra variable owner ID g-neos.test.color. Yep, that should be fine. Maybe the permissions aren't set on that appropriately. It might be that I can only write my value. I should be able to read everyone's value though. That may be how it's set up. I wasn't actually, let me double check. I've got the stuff open here. They can be written in public by the owner, meaning you need to be present to write your own value, but anyone can read the value you've written to the field. Sorry, didn't realize I couldn't write other people's values. That does make sense though. So we can't write Medra's value and it's deleted again, but we can read anyone else's value from that G color. So we're reading Medra's. We can, but let's go ahead and write mine. And this means that anyone following along this tutorial at home, so for example, if you follow this tutorial along at home, I guarantee you I won't have changed this value from this. So if you set up that read setup, which we'll show in just a moment, then you'll get this value here. So let's go ahead and pulse that. It read successfully, and then we'll go ahead and read it. So we'll copy across my user ID. You'll get that color. I won't change that. So if you go ahead and set up this setup here, you'll be using cloud variables and you'll get that color. So you go, that is the read cloud variable node and the write cloud variable node. I apologize for the confusion in the writing. I wasn't aware that it wasn't set to anyone on the right side, but it does make sense that Frixia set them up that way. I do have a group request out to the Neos team. I wanted to do it for the tutorial. Maybe I'll do some follow-up tutorials when I've got the group created, but I can explain most things here as we go, especially with just me in the world. If you'd like to see, other user interactions, I'm happy to bring another user. I believe I talked about that before. I should be able to get away with it for just these videos, but we'll keep going now. So I'm going to clear up the LogiX now because we're going to go on to the components. Actually, I do want to cut. So I'm going to go ahead and cut the video here, and then we'll go on to components for part 4. Sorry again that this is taking a long time. It's just a very complex feature that is very powerful, and I want to go through everything succinctly as possible. So again, feel free to skip around. There'll be chapters in the video, and you can also check my speed and make me faster or slow on YouTube, whatever you'd like to do. I'll see you next time for the components. Bye-bye.